Well, again, thank you for having me here today. I did this a few years ago and really enjoyed it. And this is the first time I've been in this church. Beautiful. You guys really have something to be proud of. So I always enjoy the opportunity to come and talk about what I do. Now, I'm probably not the best speaker in the whole world, but I do like to talk about what I do, and I like to answer especially questions about what I do. So I'm just going to give you a little information, and I know everybody has a question they want to ask an undertaker. So we're going to have we're going to have time for that. But I know you guys have been working on getting your ducks in a row, and certainly this is one of those things. A friend of mine's father passed away last year, and knew him real well, and he told me, he said, my dad gave me two of the greatest gifts I could ever ask for. He said, number one, because he had a lot of things going on. He said he planned his estate. And he said, I just had to show up, sign papers, and everything took its course like he had planned for it to. And he said, the other thing that he did was that he planned his funeral. And all we have to do is talk about days and times of when we're going to have the service. And that really, truly is one of the best gifts that you can leave behind your family. One of the toughest things that I do in my line of work is to sit down at a table with a family, and somebody's experienced a death, and it doesn't even have to be an unexpected death, and they have no clue what to do. I'll begin to ask questions, and they don't know. Does mom or dad want to be cremated? Do they want a memorial service? What am I supposed to do with their cremains after the service? Do they want to be buried? Do they want a viewing? All of those things are things that a funeral home is going to ask of you when a death occurs. And to take the opportunity to sit down with your family and talk about that, you don't even have to go as far as sitting down, writing it, pre-funding it, just to have the talk. So everybody knows what you want done with your remains after you pass. Also, everybody has different family dynamics, but that conversation and that pre-planning can also keep the fighting down. I don't know if your family fights, but mine does. And the older I get, it seems like the more other people's do. But anyways, it does help with that. The next part about pre-planning is the financial end of things. And I don't necessarily mean that you need to go to the funeral home and pay for your funeral. Probably the second worst thing that I deal with is when there's not a financial plan in place. People are not financially prepared for their death. That's really hard to talk about. And I know if it's uncomfortable for me, I know it's really, really uncomfortable for those that I'm talking to. And all of that can be taken care of. Now, we cannot wait until we are 92 years old. Well, we can, but for the most part, after you reach a certain age, you no longer kind of become insurable. But hopefully, along life's way, we've set money aside in some fashion, whether it's through an account or through life insurance or whatever your plan is. That's probably the next very most important thing you need to do, is to be prepared. Your family needs to be prepared financially if something happens to you. Just real quick, some of the ways that we will help families with that. Probably if you have the money on hand and you want to pay for your funeral or cremation or whatever you decide on, we have a product that somebody can place the money into, whatever service they need. You would pay at today's prices. That is then placed into an insurance product. that insurance product grows over time. I don't like to, some of you guys may have heard this before, but talk about locking in the prices. That's not really a thing. However, your money grows to where there's no more expense to your family when the time comes. That's a little hurdle we've had to get over the years. I've had people say, well, now you said this locked the price in, and it was 1982, so they want a $3,500 funeral for what might be $10,000 or $12,000 now. But if they paid for that funeral, it was placed in that product, and all this time it's growing. Of course, along with the price of a loaf of bread, funerals are going up a little bit each year. So what a funeral home's guarantee is that they will provide whatever you picked out, service and merchandise, for whatever that account has gone to. Now, I don't know anything else in this world that I can pay for today and get it 25 years in the future with no additional cost. So the funeral home takes on the risk if it's short. In the state of Georgia, if that account has grown beyond what the inflation of the funeral is, then that money doesn't have to go back to the family. We do, because we're in we also have a funeral home in Tennessee. State of Tennessee requires any additional growth to go back to the family, and I think that's honestly the way to do it. We're just proud that everything has been supplied for, and we don't even have to have that conversation, Sometimes people will have their own insurance, which is wonderful as well. Most funeral homes will take that as payment for expenses. The only time that kind of gets complicated is if you have, everybody's probably heard of Mutual of Omaha, or those are all great companies. They'll allow me to call them, do all the paperwork, get everything ready for the family, and then they will send the funeral home a check for those expenses. The only thing that kind of gets complicated with insurance is some of you folks may have retired from a big company and you've kept your insurance with that. That will still work, but they won't let a funeral home file it. They'll only talk to the spouse or whoever the beneficiary is. Now, away from here, in the bigger towns, they would not consider that an assignable insurance policy because they won't let them talk to them. But again, most funeral homes are like us. We're just glad that's in place, and it will take care of what needs to be taken care of when the time comes. I do have some people who we have options for. Maybe you can't afford all of it at once, and we have a payment plan. You really don't want to do the math. It's kind of like any other mortgage. If you added something up over 10 years and you think, well, that $12,000 funeral is pretty expensive. But sometimes it's the only way that they can be prepared for it, and it works. And it also goes beyond the age of most insurance companies where you no longer become insurable because of your age. And then a lot of people just stick money in an account that's payable on death, or maybe put it in a sock, or just whatever. But as long as that has been provided for, it makes it much easier for those that you leave behind. And honestly, the last reason, probably in our area with a lot of retired folks and a lot of folks that are still kind of taking care of their parents, we all know that when it comes time to maybe go into a nursing home, honestly, it doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't take long to go through $5,000-$6,000 a month. That's my understanding of what some of the nursing homes cost. So Medicare gives people the opportunity to set back an amount of money for funeral expenses. And they want you to place it because the money is looked at as an asset. That means you could go take it and party with it. So that's why they want you to put it in with a funeral home and make it, you may come across this word irrevocable. It means it can only be used for your expenses of your death when something happens. And most people put this whole prearrangement process off just because it's not something we want to do. It's not something we want to talk about. But most of the prearrangements that we personally see are because their spouse or one of their parents are going to have to go into the nursing home, and that's a big part of it because, like I say, at $5,000-$6,000 a month or more, it doesn't take long to go through, and so they want you to be able to protect that money. There's also, and I've had some discussions with some of the folks at the nursing home and with Social Security. When you have an insurance policy, I have personally been a part of cashing that in when the Social Security person told them to do that. And that is not right, but that's the only information they had, and they wanted me to do it for them. That's such a loss, and I just think it's a misunderstanding on some of those folks' part. You know, if you've had an insurance policy for the last 30 years, and yeah, you've got a lot of money into it, but you bought it because you were afraid something was going to happen tomorrow, and they sold it to you hoping you would keep it for 30 years, and obviously the insurance companies are winning at that, and that's perfectly okay. But I just want to let you know, if any of you get into that situation, come and talk to us about that. Let us help you, or any funeral home that maybe you're comfortable with, because I never want to see anybody cashing in their insurance policies that they've had for years and years for no reason at all. Because the cash value, if you know anything about that, is a whole lot less than its actual death benefit. So, okay. Now, does anybody have any questions at this point of anything that we've talked about? All right. Okay. No such thing. Yes. Okay. So is this person expected to pass?
Finally died.
It does. Years ago, so this is my 30th year at the funeral. I know I don't look that old, but it's my 30th year as a funeral director and embalmer. Years ago, when somebody died, there was actually nothing called hospice at that time. Phone would ring. My wife's grandfather would answer the phone, real gruff voice, as you can imagine. Mom's dead. Okay. We'd go, we'd get dressed, we'd go. We'd ask who their doctor was. And back in those days, there was about 3 or 4 regular doctors around, and they made rounds over at the hospital. So I could fill that death certificate out. Well, actually, we would pick them up. We would go by the emergency room at the hospital. One of the physicians would come out and do listen with a stethoscope, just make sure that they're sure enough passed. And they always have been. And then we would take them back to the funeral home and do what we was going to do. Because the next day I could take the death certificate to their local doctor, and that doctor would sign it. Nowadays, and back then the only thing you needed a coroner for was a sure enough, real unexplained death. somebody 32 years old dropped dead, or, the accidents or the homicides or things of that nature, because the local doctors took care of that. Now that doesn't happen. Number one, a lot of people pass away on hospice, and that's what it's for, is to make that passing easy and at home. And so they are called out, and they make the pronouncement. But if you just pass away, if you just find somebody, even if they're 85 years old and they're not on hospice, the first thing you need to do is call 911. And I know that seems like a lot, but if that ever happened, if you explain to them that, hey, I'm just using examples. Hey, what was your name again? Hey, this is Chris. I have found my mom. I don't think she's living. She's 85. She's not been doing well. They're not going to come lights and sirens and all that. They're going to come out, and then they'll call the coroner. The coroner will come out, and then they take care of that process. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. 911 is always, and a little explanation from you. That way, 2 fire trucks and 3 ambulances are not showing up at your house, But yeah, things have changed. And just prior to my generation, the funeral homes ran the ambulance service as well. So if you needed an ambulance, you called the funeral home. And I'm glad I missed out on those days. Because they say I have 1 speed, and it's not real fast either. Anybody else have any questions so far? So another part of pre-arrangements is obviously letting your kids know, or telling them. And we're kind of spoiled here in a little community. We have buried or cremated generation after generation, but that's really changing in Blue Ridge. I don't know. Maybe I've met some of you before, but to some, this is the first time we've ever talked, and it's not like that anymore. As far as you expect that you've always buried the Patterson family, that you will continue to do that, because people pick their funeral homes differently than they did 30 years ago. Most of the time, people did everything on tradition. Well, that's the way it's always been. But, people might pick because of a new relationship. They might like your website a little better, the way it views on the phone. I've heard people say, you know why I'm here? And I'm like, why? They said, because I can zoom in on the pictures on my phone of the obituary that you've listed. The other guys, that couldn't do that. And that's why we picked you. I was like, well, okay. So you never know, convenience, your location, just crossing somebody at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So kind of like back to what we were talking about, if you just passed away at home and the coroner was called, their first phone call would be to your next of kin, your daughter. Did you say you had a daughter? And then part of that conversation is which funeral home is your selection. And hopefully you've told her that and be like, that one down there by Merciers, just past there. That's the way we get described a lot. All I have to say is Merciers, and they know exactly where we're talking about. But yeah, that's which takes me back to another part of, yes, you need to tell your folks where you've done that. And funeral home calendars on the refrigerator was a thing. And we still do calendars. Well, they will be in probably 1st of October. But there was really something to that. If your calendar was hanging in the living room, that's who we're going to use. Funeral home fans. All of that stuff had a purpose, Just, especially it comes from the ambulance days. You did the ambulance work hoping that when somebody passed away, that they would use you. Because the ambulance business was a losing proposition. It was just a way to wear out cars. So, any other questions? Okay. That's a good question. I was going to, so in Georgia, in Tennessee, when you set your money aside with a funeral home, especially a private funeral home, not a corporate-owned funeral home, your money and its growth is yours to take wherever you see fit. So let's say you paid for things, and let's just say you didn't move, and you don't like my hairstyle anymore. You'd be like, I'm not dealing with that. And you go to the next funeral home. Well, you're going to have a policy. And let's say you paid $11,000 for a funeral 10 years ago. That money's grown, so you can take it to the next funeral home. Now, they may not guarantee it, which means, so when you pay for it, like I said earlier, even if it's at a loss, it's still all covered, no additional cost to the family. Now, they're not going to have that, but certainly you can take that money and apply it to your funeral anywhere else. I'll tell you one thing that I've run into, and some of you guys may have done this, but let's say you've moved here and you prearranged, especially cremation, your cremation with like the Neptune Society or a big cremation organization. Well, what's going to happen is they have no affiliates within 2 or more hours from here. You're kind of at the mercy of what the local folks do. Your money is still there, but the process is a little different. So that's why it's good for folks that maybe do have prearrangements, that have moved into the area, or even if you have prearrangements now and you're going to move, your situation changes and you, like you said, move with your kids, go talk to another funeral home. It's like, hey, this is what we have. Will you guys honor it? Is it transferable? But most funeral homes will gladly accept another pre-need company's payment. But yeah, and another thing about that with cremation, I did want to address this, is if you ask somebody how much cremation is, you will see anywhere from $695 to $4,000 or $5,000. And that really blows people's mind. Be like, well, what's the difference? So the difference is, number one, where you're at in the world. If you came from a big city, there's more competition. With competition comes more people in the game, and they'll make it a little less expensive. It depends on who you use. If you use a little storefront that doesn't have any overhead, a staff of funeral directors and people that do everything there within the funeral home. I know this building is new. We all know how expensive construction is. If you don't have all those things and you outsource everything, well, obviously your cremation can be a whole lot cheaper. And to me, there's a national average, which I think is pretty fair, which is somewhere in the $2,500 range. And then sometimes when you hear people talk about the $4,000 and $5,000 same cremation, it's because you are using a place that has a big reputation, a big following of that's where the who's who folks are. Like a direct cremation in Atlanta versus a direct cremation in Washington, D.C. There's about $5,000 difference. So a lot of that depends on where you're at. And I will tell you also that a local funeral home is going to take care of things that maybe the discount places will not. You will usually be handled with a little more time. Because when you do volume, that means you don't have the time to take with folks when you don't do that as much volume. I want to think that the end result is the same, but any local funeral home would tell you they just feel like the process is a little different. And there is a happy medium with that. And usually your local funeral home is where that is. How many people in here have done a pre-arrangement? How many have been an integral part of making funeral arrangements? Was that difficult for you? Unfortunately, you were talking about your situation there with her estate and her money, probate. That is a terrible headache. That's honestly harder than the funeral not taking the emotions out of it. That's when the real work begins. Absolutely. Even down to the little things like, let's say you and your husband and you're each other's beneficiaries on your insurance policies. Well, how many times have I met with a family, this person died, and then 5 years later the next person died, and the deceased person is still the beneficiary, And some of that comes from the old-fashioned days of an insurance salesman coming to the house and sitting down drinking a cup of coffee. And what he was trying to do was sell more insurance, but while he was there, he would do that homework stuff, get all those sorts of things arranged. People are not thinking about that like they used to because we're just really too busy is what I think our problem is. We got a lot to do and too little time to do it. And I wanted to touch on something you had mentioned. I'm so proud that because I thought you were going down a different road when you was talking about the cemetery there in New Orleans. We don't need to use that, so we've got your sister at home on the mantle. But then you proceeded to tell us that you've buried her cremated remains out here. You need to do something, and I'm going to insert this word, Christian-like, with the cremated remains. Don't leave those in the closet, on the mantle. About once a year, somebody shows up with a set of cremated remains that was left maybe in an apartment or especially thank you, a storage unit. Those are the worst. I know they had good intentions, but it never comes to pass. And then, it's one thing, these are my mom's. And then my kids get well, that was grandma. And then pretty soon, honestly, it almost becomes like a novelty item. And that's not fair, because that's a life that's been lived and was worth celebrating. But I would encourage, anytime you are involved with cremation or those end up in your possession, do something with them. Bury, scatter, shotgun shells, jewelry, trees. Let's see. That's how many of you have heard about the new legislation Georgia just passed that you could turn somebody into compost? A cannibal. So, people will on the occasion ask us about a green burial. Green burials have been around forever. It's nothing new, but now it's kind of trendy. So that's basically no embalming. The casket is made of a biodegradable material. There is no vault, and you're just placed in the earth and go back to the earth from which you came, and that's really not a big deal. Most of our cemeteries in our area here don't require a vault and don't require much of anything. The few that do require a vault is really just for the integrity of the cemetery, because if you don't, there's going to have to be a lot of attention to the graves because they're going to sink. But yeah, green burials, that's kind of a thing nowadays. And the composting, to my understanding, we have none here in the state of Georgia, but there are facilities mainly on the West Coast. So when the death occurs, you go into this facility, and the container is probably about the size of this table, square. The person is placed in there, and they have a moment, of reflection, I guess, the family does. And then there are some chemicals put in there, and it's sealed up. And, when you've been, what the video reminded me of, you've been to Sam's, and they've got these big, huge shelving. That's kind of what it is. And they're placed there for maybe 6 months. And then at that 6-month mark, what is in there is placed into a bag, and it's basically compost, fertilizer. So that's really not for me. If it comes to that, I probably wouldn't be well suited for this. I'm more of, I want to take care of you through this and handle your loved one with respect and care. And that's okay if that's what's coming and that's what it turns into. I'm 50, so maybe I don't have to worry about that. Well, obviously, so you're one of our pink ladies. Okay. So you okay, I knew you. Okay. Well, you being around Fannin, it's been, when I say Fannin, the hospital, at Blue Ridge Medical. You've seen that go through a lot of changes. But, it seems like if you have something serious wrong, you are Gainesville, Chattanooga. So that's just the way it is nowadays. And, we are on call 24 hours a day, and we will have you back into our care within a few hours. Yeah, this is, in a rural area, that's just, yeah. It really is, yeah. Which, they have, that's right. If the hospital didn't call us first, there's a lot of times when we get that initial phone call from the family, we've already been up all night to Gainesville and back. So most of the time, the family's present when the death occurs, and that will be something that they ask you. And they have a process they go through. They do some what they call post-mortem care, basically a kind of a cleanup, and give you the opportunity to say goodbye better than they looked when it actually happened. And then they have to call donor services and give the opportunity for somebody to donate some of their tissue. Now, organ donation is a total different, and I didn't know this till a few years ago. In order to truly donate your heart, lungs, the sure enough organs, there's a lot of things that have to come into place. You have to be deemed brain dead, and then a team comes in and does some counseling with you. And in the meantime, they're trying to find a recipient, and they're going through those who are well enough, sick enough to make the trip, and all of the legal things that go behind it. There's really a lot for that to happen. They fly surgeons all over to harvest those organs, and so it's a pretty neat deal. Now, what a lot of people end up doing is donating tissue and bones. You can do that anytime. It kind of makes our job a little difficult, this is not about me, and because there's not a lot left, but it's really a blessing to hear about how many people that helped when they take like the eyes, and probably, and if you've ever had any experience with somebody that's been burned, it seems like one of the scariest things that I can possibly think of, but they will use the skin off of our bodies to cover that person during their healing process, and that's pretty neat, even though it's a lot, and you don't want to think about it too much, but so those are really nice things that can happen. Trying to think how we got off on that. Yes, sir. You ever heard of don't ask, don't tell? There's more cremains in the ocean and in the national forest land than you'll ever know, and even some at the Bulldog Stadium So here's the thing. This is just you and I talking. Whatever you do, if there's an urn or possibly what they call a temporary container, okay. So when you open that, on the outside will be a tag that'll have that person's information on it. And either outside or inside of the bag is a disc that has a number that was assigned to your loved one at the time. And it has the name of the crematory on it. I wouldn't leave that behind. Probably every 3 or 4 months somebody shows up with one because it says Aiken's Crematory. And they'd be like, is it worth anything? I'd be like, no. I said, just go put it back where you found it. They said, okay. But yeah, that's, and you just kind of have to be, yeah. Now there are some nice ways to do that. Some people are really informal with it. Just you and a few close family members just go out. But there are charters that kind of make that a little nicer, especially if you really want to get out on the water. There are urns that are just meant to float away and dissolve. You know, we've all seen that on TV where people are in the wrong direction of scattering the cremains. You know, it's kind of, so you want to be downwind or upwind from that. But yeah, because if you look, it'll say, like National Forest Land, it'll say, no, you're not allowed to do that. But I'm going to guess there's a lot out there. That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. Knowingly. That's the key word here, knowingly. I don't see anything wrong with it because, you know, well, and that's another myth I like to. Has anybody ever handled cremated remains? So they're not actually ashes. Yeah. So the only thing that's left, when a cremation is done, are the larger bone fragments. And so that's pulverized into a powder if you can get to it. Sometimes it's a little coarser. And that's actually what's left. So, yes, sir. Good question. So I have some of those for sale. They're very cheap. No. So when it comes to cremation, if you ever take part in being a part of the cremation authorization, it's going to ask you some questions like, are there any radioactive, like things like pacemakers, anything primarily with a battery? Those have to be removed before cremation. Now, all the other stuff, our knees and joints and hips, stents, dental work, all that kind of stuff is separated afterwards. And we put all of that into a bin and it's recycled. I don't know what they do with it, but I just send it off. I do the pacemakers. So they tell me on the pacemakers that we send back to them that they either, one of two things, they go to third world countries and they also are used on pets. Yeah. So. Mm-hmm. Well, so when it comes to precious metals like gold or silver, the heat is so intense, it kind of becomes just you can't even really see it anymore. Now, like the things that our knees and our hips, those implants are made from, now that's good stuff, whatever it is. It's good stuff. I'm here to tell you. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, so we don't get any money for that. What they do is just kind of give us a little credit. Well, so the thing about it, so I know you guys have probably all heard funeral home horror stories about selling parts and all that. Especially, I don't know if some of you seen that documentary that just came out where they would put so many people in the crematory. No, that's another. This was in California, I believe, when cremation was really just taken off. Well, somebody, because you give us as humans an opportunity to think through things, we're going to try to make it better, faster, and more profitable. And this guy went from cremating one person to cremating, I mean, they were almost in a competition of how many people, which just sickens me to think what they had to do, but how many people they could actually cremate at one time. And then it eventually caught on fire. And this was in L.A., I'm pretty sure. And then it got the attention, and it really went downhill from there. Just to tell you how much cremation has taken off, let me ask you this. How many of you know, who and all in this room would care to be buried? How many to be cremated? Yeah. Now, if this conversation was 30 years ago, it wouldn't be, In 1980, my father-in-law, Doug Aiken, said the phone rang. And it was the kind of phone that, and you had to wait for it to go back around. Yeah, Broder, thank you. And he said, I hung up the phone. He said, Daddy, we just got a call to Atlanta. It's Mr. So-and-so, and he wants to be cremated. And his dad said, well, we ain't never done that before. 1980 to my 25-year-old son is a long time ago. 1980 to us is not. In that time, there were 2 crematories in the state of Georgia, one in Macon and one in Atlanta area. Now, about every town has one. And y'all remember the Tri-State Crematory? That's when people started, a lot of new regulation came, inspections, because honestly, prior to that, can you see how, like, today, you would look at my guys that dig the grave as a function? Well, that's the way cremation was looked at. It was just an ends to a means, or a means to an end. Does that make sense? So nobody really looked at that. And it was getting popularity, it was getting bigger and bigger, and that happened. So people started putting their own crematories in and being able to say that we know everything that's going on. You're welcome to come into our facility and witness it if you have any doubts. And it's obviously one cremation at a time, and could really defend anything that had really put a black eye in our community, or in our industry, rather, because that was really tough. So that's kind of a county by county thing. In our area, you can bury on your own property. That is what you're asking, isn't it? Okay. Do I recommend it? No. Only because there's going to come a time when that property sells. Now, it wouldn't bother me if there was somebody buried in my backyard that I didn't really have to look at. My well wasn't next to, that sort of thing, It wouldn't bother me, but a lot of, we probably move 1 or 2 people a year that is buried in their yard because it just seemed like the thing to do for the spouse at the time. And now the house is selling, and that's one of the first things they do is that has to be moved. So as you well know, we're just very rural here. Vaults are only required by a cemetery. They can say, yes, you have to have them, or no, you don't have to. Any perpetual care cemetery that you go to in the state of Georgia, that has an office and that actively sells lots and all that, they're going to require you to have a vault. And it's not for an environmental, it's more because the guy mowing the grass doesn't want to go through a dip like this every time. It kind of keeps that settling. There are some rules here in our county, like if you wanted to start a family cemetery, basically you would mark off that area and name it, and you get a tax exemption from that 1 acre or whatever. And that's fine if it's going to be a family-kept cemetery, but just in the yard, I don't think it's a good idea. Excuse me. Time? Okay. I think so. I just enjoy talking to folks and answering any questions that they have. Well, thank y'all for having me here today. If at any point you have any questions, I can be reached just past Mercier's on the right, 24 hours a day. But really, thank y'all for having me today. And if you have any questions, please let me know. All right.